There was a camaraderie there that I'd never experienced with people who were white. So it was the first time I guess I'd been with that many white people in that large crowd that day. There was something happening there that was so beautiful. And then it all blew apart. That's the fire hoses, and that's the dogs. John Lewis, he put his body on the line to make sure that good trouble meant that trouble could be good if you're pushing for an ideal to perfect something, trying to make democracy work for everybody. Yes, I am an activist, and it goes back a long way, although I didn't know the term activist when I became one because I was only 8 years of age. On the last day of school of my third grade year, I had overheard two of my older sisters discuss the possibility of going to the zoo that day. And I was not going to be left at that school and not with them at the zoo. And my mother said, "No, your older sisters aren't going to the zoo, and neither are you." And that's when I found out about Jim Crow laws. It took years to understand and to unpack just the two words Jim Crow meant. The way my mother explained it, for whatever reason, Black people were not treated as human beings by the majority of white people in the United States. Your dad and I forbid you to go to a place where if you can't go every day, you can't go any day. That was the way of life in many a place, not just in the South, but in the North also. And that has stuck with me throughout the years. It took growth and maturity for me to understand what happened on that last day of the school year back in 1944 when I was 8 years of age, which brings me to the 1965 Selma to Montgomery March. With a crowd that was larger than I'd ever experienced in my life, waving us on and cheering us on. There was a camaraderie there that I'd never experienced with people who were white. So it was the first time I guess I'd been with that many white people in that large crowd that day. There was something happening there that was so beautiful and just so amazing. And then it all blew apart. Bloody Sunday was called that only after it happened. But the assembled group had gotten there because a young Black man had been killed by the police.
Jimmie Lee Jackson was participating in a peaceful voting rights march in Marion, Alabama, organized by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. With him, his 16-year-old sister Emma Jean, his mother Viola, and his grandfather. Alabama state troopers confronted the protesters and began beating them. Jimmie Lee, while attempting to shield his family from the attack, was shot twice in the stomach by trooper James Fowler.
Jimmie Lee Jackson, an unarmed young Black man. An unarmed young Black man.
8 days after being shot, Jimmie Lee Jackson died from his gunshot wounds on February 26, 1965. A local grand jury declined to indict State Trooper James Fowler for firing the deadly shots.
As he eulogized Jimmie Lee Jackson at his funeral, Dr. Martin Luther King professed, "A state trooper pointed the gun, but he did not act alone. He was murdered by the brutality of every sheriff who practices lawlessness by the name of law."
And Martin Luther King was invited to come back to Selma because of the murder of this Black man. And that's why the young people and old people were assembled to march to express their disgust and their grievance against the government. What happens when a white person wakes up in the morning and something has shifted? That something shifts when Black people have power. When you give them the power, young people and old people gathered to denounce what had happened, repeat it. It's not just that one incident.
To be detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly. You are to disperse. You are ordered to disperse.
That's the fire hoses. And that's the dogs. I can visualize those young girls' bodies being pushed against the wall with the force of the water. I can almost smell the horses as they plopped around. Here at the end of this gorgeous day, this happens. I saw John Lewis for the first time on the grounds on that Sunday. I didn't know who he was, but you could see his face, the contortion. I want to get these words right for John Lewis. Many people, many Black men have been powerful with their voices in making a point of making democracy work for everybody. He was one of those men trying to make democracy work for everybody. And in the process, he put his body on the line to make sure that good trouble meant good trouble, that trouble could be good if you're pushing for an ideal to perfect something. The perfection of what? Something that should be very precious to all of us, democracy. It was years later that, actually it was the year December of 2016, he invited us to his home. My niece and her husband were there and their 3 children. That was one of the satisfying evenings of my entire life, to sit there in his home, and we just sat and chatted as if we had known each other for a long time. And so when I think of a John Lewis, I think of him in the middle of Black Lives Matter Street in DC, just before his death. And I can visualize him wearing his hat with 1619 on one side and Black Lives Matter, I believe, on the other. And he's standing there with a crowd of people around him, primarily white young people, because they admired him too.
We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand.
When I think of John Lewis, in the end, I think of him in that street, Black Lives Matter, passing a baton to that group of youngsters out there, saying, here, get in good trouble. Follow my lead. Get in good trouble. Perfect our democracy. Take it from there.
We are not afraid.